This is one damn fine cup of coffee. Well, hello everyone. My name is Nathan Jones, and if you're new here, welcome. I talk about all things movies, specifically Blu-rays, and today we are covering week 5 of my film journey. This time we're kind of putting a little bit of a focus on this show right here and this movie, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Obviously, that's where I had my cup of coffee. Obviously, I'm still, it's the morning when I'm recording this, so this is my cup of coffee. Actually, this is what I normally do every morning. So, regardless, so you're probably going to hear me clear my throat quite a bit, But with that being said, we are covering week 5 of my film journey, which is August 11th through August 17th. So I'm a little bit behind, as you can kind of tell. I'm actually going to be putting out week 6 here probably relatively pretty soon, so I can kind of catch up and, just kind of be up to date with what I'm doing for the weeks and, not let the weeks kind of pass by and make me forget. That's why actually I'm film journaling, right? So if anyone's not familiar with this, I've been film journaling for the last 5 weeks, like actually physically writing out these things where I'm watching TV shows and I'm watching movies, and it's been a delightful thing to do. Mainly because it's been just holding myself accountable, but also getting myself back in the love of the medium itself. So it's been a lot of fun. So let's jump into the things that I watched for week 5. So let's start off with Twin Peaks. Let's start off with a really big one. And we're going to jump into season 1 and 2 of this show. So let's jump into Twin Peaks. So, as some of you know, I actually watched this. I started watching this over in the UK. I watched the pilot episode. I watched a few episodes while I was over there. Chris, big shout out to you for getting me the catalyst to start this whole thing. And also big shout out to Sam and Davey, who have, over the years, been constantly telling me to watch this show. And along with a lot of my friends. Honestly, a lot of my friends have told me to watch Twin Peaks for the longest time. So, I'm just really glad to finally jump onto this journey. And it's been a wild ride. So today we're just going to be talking briefly about seasons 1 and 2. I'm actually going to not spoil too much, but if anyone has not seen this show, please skip this section of the video because I will be kind of getting in depth a little bit. I'm not super critical or in depth with this kind of stuff because I like people to kind of watch it on their own accord and kind of piece together things that they can piece together. So anyway, we have Cooper right here, who is an FBI agent who is heading to Twin Peaks in Washington after the death of Laura Palmer, who washes up on shore on the lake. And we'll get to Laura Palmer here in a second. There she is right there. And we're trying to figure out what's going on in this town, this really strange town with a bunch of strange characters all over town, including a diner, a sheriff's office, a crazy doctor with 2 colored glasses, a trucker who is the weirdest guy in town, I would argue, that is abusive to his wife, and honestly, there's just all these colorful people left and right coming in and out of the show, and definitely starts getting crazier and crazier as things go on, obviously, as David Lynch and Mark Frost kind of join forces and split apart a little bit as well, as we see as they untether in season 2. So season 1, going back to my journey with season 1, this has been an absolute treat. The pilot is one of the best pilots I've ever watched from a show. One that really intrigued me enough to be like, okay, well, I need to figure out what is going on in Twin Peaks and figure out the mystery of Laura Palmer and the mystery of so many other things that I'll get to a little bit later. Season 1 was just a really good treat that ended on a cliffhanger of sorts and kind of propelled me into season 2. And season 2 is where there's only a few episodes of season 1, so it was a relatively successful run that happened in 1990, and it made so much sense to let's start a second season. And at the time, second seasons were 22 episodes. That was like just the norm. To have 22, 24 episodes, that was kind of the norm for a lot of television shows. And so that's kind of what happened. And honestly, that's where maybe some of the division came about with Mark Frost and David Lynch, because I know David Lynch around kind of the episode 8 or 9 mark in season 2. Kind of left, I think, a little bit and let Mark Frost kind of take over a little bit. It became a little bit more melodramatic. You definitely have a lot of interesting storylines that really don't really go very far. Obviously, I haven't watched The Return, so there are some things that are left unsaid, of course. But regardless, within season 2, it's like, okay, well, are we just trying to figure out what to do, with certain characters because they aren't, applied to the main story? And so just because they're interesting, which, by the way, I could watch this show every day and just kind of get lost in Twin Peaks. And that's how much I love this show. So at the same time, the quality is not there as much as it was in season 1, where the mystery was kind of really becoming more, I guess, revelatory. But at the same time, all the characters are just so much fun to watch, even though there are some characters, like I said, that, like, why are you here? Anyway, I digress. There are so many fantastic people that are in and out of the show. There's a lot of twists and turns. I won't dive too far into them because I would like people to watch them for themselves and kind of make up their own opinions about it. But I will say, before I jump into Fire Walk with Me, and before I jump in to spoilers, fair warning, I'm spoiling things right now, okay? So if you are watching this and you haven't seen Twin Peaks, do not watch the rest of this particular section. So near the end of season 2, there are some really crazy things that happened when talking about the Black Lodge, Wyndham Earl, and Bob possessing the Leland, who is Laura's father, and things get really, really messed up. And Cooper gets whisked away as he's going after Annie, who Wyndham Earl had taken over from the Twin Peaks pageant, what she won, because Wyndham Earl had been kind of an agent of the Black Lodge. And so this Black Lodge is this mysterious realm, which in my eyes, I think has a lot to do with Native American spiritualism, and it's his own, like, Lynch's concoction of sorts, right? And so Cooper, follows Annie and Wyndham Earl into, the honestly, just where the red curtains are, the Black Lodge. And as we've been seeing throughout the show, we've been seeing, the giant, we've been seeing the dwarf, who have been warning him to, stay away from this place and, to do these things left and right. But Cooper ends up there. He sees the ghost and the specter of Laura Palmer. And Laura Palmer lets him know I will see you in 25 years. And that's when the return comes in 25 years from now. But we'll get to the return here in a bit. But what an absolute insane ending to a show. I loved season 1 and 2 so much. I know I had kind of mentioned parts of season 2 being a little droll, or at least dragging in certain ways. But I honestly, it was just a blast to kind of just see what was coming next. You really you couldn't expect what was coming next. You couldn't guess what was coming next, even though, like I said, my theory is a lot to do with Native American spiritualism, and I think there's some spirits that are taking over certain characters. So at the end of season 2, we see Bob within Cooper's body, so a doppelganger has taken over. So wow, insane stuff. Again, if I spoiled anything, that's what it is. But let's jump into Fire Walk with Me right here, which right here, this is a prequel to the show. So this is supposed to be right before season 1. So right before Cooper comes around, and is a movie that came out in 1992, which is my birth year, and might arguably be one of the best movies of this year. So Fire Walk with Me, this is probably one of the most visceral and scary experiences I've ever had watching a film. It's really unnerving in a lot of ways. Obviously, watching season 1 and 2 helps a lot when it comes to piecing this together. And we'll talk about the missing pieces here in a bit too, which is an extra feature on this disc. But this Criterion disc is like, With that being said, though, this movie is quite terrifying. To see Laura Palmer go through and really honestly predict what was going to happen to her, and all the friends and family that we had met in season 1 and 2, and all the people that were around her during her death, and really confused by like what happened to her. They are affected by this, but Laura Palmer even more affected by it. And you can tell by Cheryl Lee's performance how intense this was. But at the same time, David Lynch really did an excellent job in taking care of the humane and the emotional aspect of this film, and really grounding us in the fact that, like, hey, this is somebody who is just like us in a way, who has their secrets. They have their secrets that a lot of people don't even know about. And at the same time, it also shows them with dignity and a little bit more on that humane side. And that's where Laura Palmer comes in, where there's that dual nature of her going through these, sex, drugs, and rock and roll periods, but also at the same time being, this friend to all of her friends, who is like just really sweet and honestly just wants to be a normal girl. But all these things haunting her, it's really intense. And the revelation in this film, when you see Leland really getting taken over by Bob, it's frightening. And there are some really intense moments that, like, honestly, I would not like to experience again. However, I love this film, and so I probably will watch it again because it's just an incredible horror film. But that being said, this movie is an absolute treat. It's really intense. It's one of the most intense things I've ever watched. And if you are weak to stomach, or at least seeing somebody struggle through the inevitable, this is what this movie is all about. And Laura Palmer eventually does succumb and obviously washes up on shore, as we see in season 1. That is Fire Walk with Me, and I'm skipping a lot of parts because I just don't want to go there. But I do want to also talk about the extra features on this disc, which are really quite fantastic right here. This is a 4K digital transfer, and it looks fantastic, by the way. It sounds good, too. It sounds much better than the TV show, of course. But it also has a documentary called The Missing Pieces, which is 90 minutes of deleted and alternate takes from the film assembled by Lynch. So apparently this special feature actually became a movie and was put out, I believe, a few years prior to the return, and was some missing pieces that were not a part of Fire Walk with Me originally, but this is what was shot during this time period. And honestly, it was quite a treat, because it was kind of cheering up people into, we're about to come back to Twin Peaks with the return. And honestly, it's really important to watch The Missing Pieces, actually, because of the things that we didn't see in Fire Walk with Me or in the first or second season. There's one scene in particular in The Missing Pieces that I'm actually a little shocked that he didn't keep in the film itself, but at the same time, I kind of love that it's on its own in The Missing Pieces. And it is a hallway scene with Laura Palmer, and that is probably one of the best acting performances I've ever seen. Cheryl Lee, you just do fantastic work in this film, and it's terrifying. It really is. That's the best way I could describe this. But The Missing Pieces, it literally is a hodgepodge of different deleted scenes and things that are extended. And honestly, it really does illuminate some things going on behind the scenes, but it won't prepare you for the return, which we will get to. But I watched The Missing Pieces actually on Sunday, the 17th, actually. I watched Fire Walk with Me. I gave myself a week between this so I could properly start the return, which we'll get to in week 6. But I really wanted to give myself some space between Twin Peaks and Fire Walk with Me. And then I did, and then I watched Fire Walk with Me, and then I gave myself some space for Missing Pieces, which would get me back into the mood of this entire crazy storyline. And like I said, I'm currently in the return, and we'll get to that here in a bit. But absolutely insane show. Love season 1 and 2. And I love this film. This is probably one of my favorite films I've watched in a very long time. And it was well worth going through this journey of watching seasons 1 and 2 and kind of just seeing this showcase of all of these oddball characters, come together or tear apart in ways, and honestly, it's a brilliant thing, and I'm starting to love Lynch. So this is an exciting time. So we'll get back to Twin Peaks. Like I said, I know this is the first part of the video, but let's now go in chronological order of what I did for the rest of the week. But that wasn't the only show that I watched during this time. I also on Sunday watched and finished House of Dragons Season 2. So this is Game of Thrones, and I've been a big Game of Thrones fan ever since it came out back in the early 2010s, and I read all the books the last couple of years, and I'm caught up, obviously, and George R. R. Martin needs to finish those. But regardless, House of Dragons, which I have read Fire and Blood, which is a great little book that kind of reminds me of Genesis in the way that it kind of gives a lot of names and numbers, but there is some really good depth in there as well. But I really am happy that George R. R. Martin is a part of the production team behind this show and this series, because you really can tell there is a lot more build up and a lot more of the things that we would see in Game of Thrones, like in the early seasons of the original series, which I really enjoy, which to me it's all about dialogue, it's about politics, it's about sex, betrayal, and some violence in there as well. So that's what that is all about for me. Now, Season 2, I would argue, is maybe not as good as Season 1. Season 1 kind of jumped around a little bit, and I didn't love that, but I understood why they were doing that. They were trying to get to the point where the black and the greens would split between the Targaryens, and this would start this whole war. And that's honestly, it's really just leading up to more and more of that, and we're seeing more and more of that as there are inching closer and closer to war, and that's what Season 2 kind of showcased. And there are some really cool moments. There was some Dragon Rider moments, because one half of the team doesn't have enough dragons, or at least dragon riders, or they have enough dragons but they don't have enough dragon riders, and so they do a competition and have all these bastard Targaryens come, and in a very sweeping way. That was probably maybe the pinnacle of Season 2 for me, was watching that whole scene, and just seeing the different personalities that come through and actually become dragon riders. That's just really cool. But it all kind of is a build-up season, and it's a little disappointing to not get as much exposition as I would like, but at the same time, I'm still really enjoying the ride. And I would say that the last episode was a good one that showcased that it was very much like the end of, I believe, I would say it reminds me of the episode where Dany was about to cross the sea, and the Lannisters were getting all ready, and they were about to have a war, right? That's kind of what it reminds me of, is like, hey, Season 3 is going to be all about war, and that's what this is, and that's what this whole thing is a build-up. But at the same time, I really enjoyed it, and definitely am excited for Season 3 whenever that comes out, and I'll be definitely ready for that, because fantasy, one of my favorite genres, just period. So Game of Thrones, great stuff. I'd give this season maybe a 7.5 out of 10, maybe, 7.5. And it's been a good series though overall. All right, so now we're moving past Twin Peaks and Game of Thrones. On Monday, I had to cleanse myself from watching Fire Walk with Me, because that movie was so intense that I had to just chill out and not watch something super serious. So I watched Pineapple Express. I rewatched that film. It gets better with age. I don't know why, but it's a really stupid stoner comedy, of course, with James Franco and Seth Rogen. And honestly, I get new things every time, even though they're paying a lot of homage to a lot of the 80s murder mystery and thriller kind of buddy cop things going on. So I love the combination of that, and it's just a fun film. It's got a lot of dumb one-liners, of course, and I've seen this movie quite a bit of times, and one of my favorite things to always say is, food's still warm, and I say, I kill motherfuckers with my hands. So for the rest of the week, I actually decided to jump into some second sight films, and some that I've had on my shelf for some time. One I've seen before. I literally just upgraded, and pun intended, it's upgrade. And I kind of wanted to dive into some of the things that have been sitting on my shelf for a second, and so give myself a little bit of a break from Twin Peaks and watch some movies. And so I actually watched a bunch of thrillers, some crime thrillers, that is. But the first one I watched was Upgrade, of course. I have seen this a few times now, and I watched the second sight version of it now on Blu-ray, and it is quite the treat. And I quite enjoyed this film. I haven't pull into these special features too much, there is a poster in here, which is really cool, because this is actually just a really interesting science fiction dystopian future where the camera work is just really, really good. Because you're just kind of following this guy is going through a very horrible tragedy and trying to take revenge on the person who has started this whole thing. So it's a fun movie, and there's some really cool things involved in here, but there's quite a bit of special features, of course, as Second Sight always puts together. Yeah, just really cool stuff. Really fun movie. Again, shout out to Chris for this, as I really appreciate you getting me this over here. And yeah, this is just a fun film that I really, really enjoy. It's definitely like a 4 out of 5 for me. It's one that I feel like I like more and more every time I watch it. Next, I move to Eric Bana in Choppa. Wow, what a crazy, crazy guy. Apparently this is a real life story, and of a real life killer who is played by Eric Bana, who, I guess the real life guy is actually in, I think Tasmania is where he's at now. He's housed there, but Australia's most infamous and celebrated criminal figure is what it says. Mark Chopper Reed, and yeah, it actually has a commentary with him, which I thought was absolutely bananas. And in fact, I watched the first 40 minutes of that just to kind of hear his thoughts and kind of see if there's any similarities between him and Eric Bana. And wow, it was really alarming. To me, it's alarming the fact that he's celebrated, because apparently he was only convicted for, I think, maybe just one of the murders that he said, and he's stated that he's done. I think he's killed 20 something people or something like that. But it's kind of hard because it's a black comedy of sorts as well, because he's got such a good charisma to him, but he's also, you can tell he's a loose cannon, and anytime anyone kind of looks at him wrong or says the wrong thing, you can tell he's like, okay, well, I'm about to go off and kill this person, and that's okay. And that was the crazy part, was hey, this is okay, right? But this is a fun film regardless. And it's weird because this came out in, I think 2000 is when this movie came out, so I didn't really know much about this, and seeing Eric Bana kind of get lost in this role was quite the treat, because you don't really see Eric Bana anymore, of course, but in the early 2000s he was a huge star, and I feel like this is one of the films that really propelled him forward, of course. So I was just really pleased to have picked this up from Second Sight, and yeah, it was a great release, one that really shook me a little bit because of how crazy this person is, and the fact that he's notorious in a way, but celebrated. It's weird to me, but regardless, I had a good time with it. And even though I cracked a few smiles and horror at the same time. So 4 out of 5 for me as well on this one. Great film, Chopper. Eric Bana, come back, please. You're a great actor. And the last film I watched from Second Sight was The Krays. This is from 1990, and this is a nice English, I guess, crime thriller of sorts about the Kray brothers, who are played by Gary and Martin Kemp, who are apparently a part of a band, which I can't remember how to say their name, so I'm just going to put it here, but really enjoy their stuff. It reminds me of Depeche Mode and The Cure, which I am a fan of. And so didn't know that. I looked into that a little bit. But so The Krays starts off with them as little boys. We have Ronnie and Reggie, who are getting taken care of by their mom, who is single and by herself. And she's honestly scarier than the Krays as they grow up, because she allows them to kind of get up into this crime syndicate and really just take care of the East End in general. And yeah, she's really scary. But regardless, Ronnie and Reggie, one of the brothers is a little bit more of a heartthrob than the other ones, and the other one is more of hey, I'm the loose cannon, I'm the one who will take charge. People need to fear us. And that dynamic and the dichotomy between those two, that's what splits them up, obviously, and it lends to their downfall. So regardless, it's a fun film, but at the same time, there are some really lull moments. I think the pacing is a little off for me. I didn't really love the way that things are kind of put together, and so for that reason, it was probably less of an experience that I wanted. So I would probably give this film a 3 out of 5. Definitely a good film, regardless of what I'm saying, but at the same time, definitely doesn't add up to what I've been watching. And apparently, I didn't know this, but pieced together as I was watching this. But I didn't realize that Legend with Tom Hardy was just a re-adaptation of the same story, which is probably around the same type of quality. But I might prefer this one, but who knows. But The Craze, had a good time with that one. Second Sight, glad you put this out, and I've just had a really great Second Sight just run, honestly, during the week to cleanse myself of Fire Walk With Me a little bit and just enjoy some crime thrillers. But in the morning, I wanted to watch some Sandals and Swords, and that Sandal and Sword film was The Sword and the Sorcerer, directed by Albert Pyun, that came out in 1982. And this is the version I think that Scream Factory has done, but it is on streaming. I believe I watched it on Amazon Prime. And yeah, it was just a really fun little, sword, like epic, right? Sword epic. Albert Pyun is known for making some pretty bad films, but they're really fun, of course. I've only seen a few of his films, and this one arguably has been the best that I've seen so far. Definitely when it comes to creature design, because there is a creature in here, a warlock, wizard, like necromancer probably, is probably the right word, who, like, the very beginning of the film, I'm like, okay, this is a horror film. Like, this is gonna get spooky. But turns out to be more the Robin Hood, King Arthur variety type of film, but just muddier and darker and dirtier than that. And Albert Pyun puts that stamp on there, and I quite enjoy that. In fact, the practical effects in here are quite fun. Despite the practical effects being fun, I do want to say that it does lull in the middle a little bit as well when it comes to the plot, and there's some character choices that I'm like, oh wow, I guess this is how we're gonna go about this. And I was a little confused by some choices, but at the same time, I still had a good time with it. And as a movie, I definitely would recommend, and I probably will pick up the Scream Factory edition eventually one of these days. But I had a lot of fun with this movie, and I just wanted more of the necromancer. I wanted more practical effects. I wanted a little bit more action, because a lot of the scenes in the action were, like battlefields that were after a fight, and that's like, it's like, hey, let's save some money and not actually shoot any fighting scenes. So that's kind of where that kind of goes a little bit lower here. But you know what? I'd give it a 3 out of 5 as well, just like The Craze. But I think I like this movie a little bit more than The Craze, so definitely a little bit more enjoyable. But yeah, I had a good time with it. And that actually led me, Saturday, I actually was able to pick up these titles, which I actually just talked about in my last video. I was able to pick up these A24 titles, which I actually covered on another video, which you should check out if you haven't seen. But I did watch Love Lies Bleeding on Saturday night as well, and this was quite the treat. And if you want to hear my full thoughts on this, definitely go check out that video. But I ended the night with The Missing Pieces and Twin Peaks, and I started the week with Twin Peaks. And this whole week has really kind of been cemented by that. Obviously, I watched some other films in between, some Second Sight films, and Pineapple Express just to laugh, and The Sword and the Sorcerer, of course, just to have a little bit of fantasy action. But yeah, it was a great week. And this week, I definitely reflect back a little bit more on Twin Peaks and how the show has impacted me a little bit, and my outlook on Lynch, and has changed quite a bit and tremendously, I think, in a positive outlook. And I'm just really excited to jump into The Return, which we will talk about in week 6. With that being said, I also would love to hear your thoughts on The Journey itself. Give me some recommendations. If there's anything that you're watching right now, or a movie that I should check out, I would love to know. Let me know in the comment section. I would love to hear your thoughts on your own film journey as well. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can give it a like, comment down below, share, hit the notification bell, subscribe, and fire walk with me. I'm not Jones.